So I think we'll get going. I am Leanne Redden. I'm the Executive Director of the Regional Transportation Authority, and I am simply here to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. This is our first of our Transportation Tuesday sessions for this year, a very successful series of programming that our staff have put together. Today's topic is going to be focused on capital and the new metrics that we have identified for helping us sort of select and essentially sort of curate the collection of capital projects that our region puts together for the transit network. And so with that, again, just thanks for joining us. Encourage you to also sign up and join other ones coming forward. There'll be more information about that. But I will sign off essentially and turn it over to Mary, who's going to introduce our speakers.
Thank you for the introduction, Leanne. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Mary Ireland. I'm a senior analyst on the RTA's capital programming team, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started, just a few items. This meeting is being recorded and will be published on the RTA's YouTube channel. If you would please take a moment to check that you're on mute to minimize background noise. And finally, there will be time at the end of the session for questions. To participate, you can use the raise hand feature, or you can type your question in the chat box. As Leanne mentioned, we're joined today by staff from the RTA, as well as from our partners at CTA, PACE, and Metra. I'd like to introduce each of our panelists. Joining us today, we have John Sung. John is a senior analyst on the capital programming team at the RTA, where he's worked for the past 7 years. Prior to joining the capital team, John worked in the regional coordination department as the project manager for the Interagency Sign Maintenance Program. John received his Master of Public Policy from DePaul University School of Public Service. Chris Szmurlo. Chris is a principal analyst at the RTA, where he's worked for the past 8 years. His responsibilities range from managing the RTAM's website to various mapping efforts. Chris received his master's degree in urban planning from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Clare McGuire. Clare is a senior project manager for controls for the Red Line Extension project at the Chicago Transit Authority. She joined the CTA in 2020, working on the Core Infrastructure Capital Program, contributing to projects supporting bus electrification, accessibility, and state of good repair needs. Before coming to the CTA, Clare worked at the University of Chicago Inclusive Economy Lab as the budget operations manager and at Chicago Public Schools as the school budget manager, where she managed allocation modeling and budgeting for 650 schools and $3.5 billion. Clare is originally from Omaha, Nebraska. She attended the University of Michigan for her bachelor's degree in history and English and has a master's degree in public finance and policy analysis from Indiana University. She and her husband live in the South Loop. Roberto Torres. Roberto is the Chief Mechanical Officer at PACE Suburban Bus, where he manages implementation and performance for the electrification of PACE buses, facilities, and infrastructure through the agency's Project Zero initiative. Roberto began his career at International Harvester in 1998 as a proud United Auto Workers member, working in the Research and Development Lab and collaborating with engineers to lower greenhouse gas emissions. In 2012, Roberto moved to the public sector as part of Cook County's Air Monitoring Division before transitioning to a bus maintenance manager role at the Chicago Transit Authority in 2016. At the CTA, Roberto gained valuable experience in public transportation, published 2 official CTA documents, and led a team that had the highest performance for 2 years straight. In 2019, Roberto moved to the city of Chicago as a vehicle maintenance manager. He managed the North Side Garage for police and city service vehicles, one of the top performing garages thanks to strong relationship building and positive employee management. He was a team member for the city's electrification project for police and city service vehicles and worked on plans to update facilities to support electric vehicles. Roberto joined the PACE team in 2022. He has a BS in business management and an MBA in finance. Dustin Clark. Dustin manages Metra's program development and grant pursuits division, which is responsible for actively managing the one-year capital program, drafting the 5-year capital program, and writing the agency's discretionary grant applications. Since joining Metra, Dustin has rebuilt the capital funding investment prioritization process, retooled the methods for developing capital programs, and has helped to secure more than $500 million in discretionary grants. So thank you to our panelists for joining us today. John is going to start today's session by discussing the 12 evaluation themes that the RTA and service boards use to evaluate and select projects for the 5-year regional capital program. These themes are outlined in Transit is the Answer, the Regional Transit Strategic Plan that was adopted by the RTA Board of Directors in February 2023. So John, over to you.
Thanks, Mary. Hi, I'm John, everyone. Happy to be here with everyone today. Okay, let's just jump right in, shall we? Next slide. Oh, there we go. Evaluation themes. These new evaluation metrics for capital projects help ensure capital investments in their region are targeting areas of improvement outside of the standard state of good repair, which is just one of the evaluation areas. As a refresher, I'll briefly review each of these, and after we will provide more in-depth information about each of the topics today. The evaluation themes are as follows: access to key destinations, racial equity and mobility justice, economic development, reliability improvement, capacity needs, safety, state of good repair, climate impact, customer experience, accessibility for people with disabilities, meeting regulatory requirements, impact on operating costs. The evaluation process was a collaborative effort between RTA and each of the service boards. Each project in the 2024 capital program has been evaluated by all metrics. As part of their capital program submittal, the service boards were required to evaluate each project against all of the 15 evaluation metrics. After they submitted their capital program, RTA assembled a team to review the metric score against the project, its location, and scope to ensure scoring was representative of the spirit of the metrics. The RTA team identified scores that needed adjusting and provided a recommended adjusted score. Any recommended adjustments were sent to the service boards and then discussed between the service board and RTA until a final score was agreed upon. With that said, the same process will take place for the 2025 capital program. Our partners from each of our service boards will talk more about the projects and grants that support the following themes. Let's get into a little bit more detail about these. Next slide, please. All right, up first we have equity. This measures equity in terms of residential geography. The methodology used to measure this is based on the U.S. Department of Transportation's Justice 40 initiative. The initiative is designed to ensure that projects will benefit communities in the most need for affordable transportation options, connect residents to good-paying jobs, fight climate change, and improve access to resources and quality of life in communities. Projects in the current capital program that support improving equity are CTA's Red Line Extension, and both Metra and PACE's collaborative project, the Harvey Intermodal Transportation Center. Our speaker from CTA, Clare, will talk a little bit more about CTA's Red Line Extension project a little bit more later. Next slide, please. All right. And up next, we have accessibility. This measures how a project improves accessibility for the region. This shows whether a project makes a location full or partially accessible, or is needed to maintain current levels of accessibility. Projects in the current capital program that support improving accessibility are CTA's All Stations Accessibility Program projects, Metra's various station projects, and PACE's Pulse projects. Both Metra and CTA have been successful in winning over a combined $185 million in federal discretionary funds from the FTA's ASAP program. Our speaker from Metra, Dustin, will talk more about this measure in the context of pursuing grant funding supporting this measure. Next slide, please. Okay, and our last metric here. This theme has two metrics associated with it. The first one is ridership/mode shift, and the second is climate agency operating impacts. Looking at mode shift, this measures ridership impacts of the project. According to MIT's climate portal, transportation in general creates more than a fifth of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. GHG emissions can go down by shifting people from riding a private automobile to becoming customers on transit. Projects in the current capital program that improve mode shift include each service board's vehicle replacement programs. The other metric for this theme is climate agency operating impacts, which is primarily a measure on both revenue and non-revenue vehicles. It can also include facilities that include green power production in the project. Think solar or wind power. Projects in the current capital program that improve operating impacts include both CTA and PACE's electric bus purchases and Metra's zero emissions train sets. Our speaker from PACE, Roberto, will talk more about PACE's climate impact projects, specifically their zero emissions bus fleet transition plan. And one last thing that I'm really excited about is an internal project at RTA in collaboration with RTA's comms department and our RTM's team. Our aim is to create a cohesive set of icons and symbology, which are meant to intuitively convey the results of the service board self-evaluations. Without getting into too much detail, I'll just say that my colleague Chris will have more on this later, and he's up next. Chris?
Hello, everyone. Chris Szmurlo from the RTA. I'm a principal analyst, and today I'll show where users can find more information about the capital program, the projects, as well as the evaluation metrics that John was talking about. So RTAMS is the website where all this information is housed. It is the RTA's Mapping and Statistics website. In this section titled Transit Projects and Studies, users can find more information about the program and links within the RTA's website where they can read more about how the program was established and how it's maintained year to year. In the very first link, there is a table that shows all the priority projects in the regional capital program. The priority projects are sort of umbrella term for all similar themed efforts in the program. So, for example, there's a lot of rail station improvements within the regional program. If you click this plus button, you can see all the individual projects that are part of that priority project. Now, if someone wants to look, for instance, at the evaluation metrics for a specific project, they just have to click the plus button one more time. The project I'm showing right now is the Red Line extension, which extends the Red Line past 95th. There are two links. One will take you to a map of where that project is occurring, and the second one will take you to a link that shows you all the evaluation metrics for that specific project. As you can see, here are all the metrics on the left, and then the measures for that specific metric on the right. You can hover over here to get a little bit more information on the definition for those metrics, but this exists for pretty much most, if not all, of the projects in the program. So one way users can look for these metrics for a specific project is just perusing through the table, or if they know the title or name of a specific project, they can go here. Let's say they want to learn more about the 16th Street Interlocker project. That's a Metra project. They can click apply and see that that will show up within the results. And if they want to find that link to show them the evaluating metrics for this specific project, you click that plus button one more time. Here are the two links I mentioned. Click on the right one, and as you can see, here are the evaluating metrics for this 16th Street Interlocker capital project. I should also note that this information is also available for download. So at the very top of this page, where the table of projects is being shown, is a link to the capital projects downloadable data sets. The first one right here is the one you will want. You click download, it'll download to your computer. You click on it, a spreadsheet will open, and as you can see, there's a tab that's kind of defines all the evaluation metrics, and then the projects tab here lists all of those metrics for each specific project. Also, another thing to note, as John alluded to, we are in the process of adding visualizations to our tables on RTAMs. Here is a quick sneak peek of what something like that would look like. Looks very similar to the tables I showed earlier, just adding a kind of visualization feature, making it easier for people to see quickly what they're looking at. That's pretty much everything I have to present today. If you have any questions, as was mentioned earlier, we will have a Q&A session at the very end. So that's where you can find more information about the capital program as well as evaluation metrics. Thank you.
Thank you, John and Chris. I'm going to reshare my screen and turn it over to Claire, who will discuss CTA's Red Line Extension project.
Thanks, Mary, and good afternoon, everybody. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go a little bit over the project overview for the Red Line extension. This is a 5.6-mile rail extension going south from 95th Street, the current terminal, to 130th Street. There will be 4 new fully accessible stations at 103rd, 111th, Michigan Avenue, and 116th, essentially, and then 130th Street in Algot Gardens. Each station will have multimodal connections to bus, bike, pedestrian, and park and ride facilities. The project will also be constructing a new train yard and shop facility at 120th Street. Next slide, please. In terms of the project schedule and where we are now, we are currently in the engineering phase of the federal grant program that's going to provide the majority of the funding for the project. We are hoping to get our big federal grant, full funding grant agreement towards the end of this year, and then we would be entering construction next year. Construction is currently scheduled to go through 2029. We're supposed to have revenue service by the end of 2029, although that schedule is, as everyone can imagine, is kind of subject to change because we are still in procurement for our largest contract, and also just generally in engineering and design for many of the other parts of the project that will be happening through 2029. Some big accomplishments to date. We have a large transit TIF of $956 million that was approved by the city of Chicago last year. We have all of our professional service contracts on board to support the project at this point. We also have a transit supportive development plan, which I will talk about, that was adopted last year as well. And as I referenced, we have just under $2 billion in the federal New Starts program that will be funding the majority of this project. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the background, as I'm sure a lot of the folks who are on this call have taken the Red Line before. It is our most traveled line, represents 30% of our rail customers. It runs all day, every day, which is rare for transit lines. The only other line like that in the city is the Blue Line. The current terminal at 95th Street was completed in 1969. So coming back to extend south to closer to the border of the city is something that the community has wanted for a long time. So it's very exciting for that community and for the CTA to be embarking on this project. The project area is home to more than 100,000 residents. 22% of those households lack an automobile, and they are more likely than the average Chicago resident to be unemployed, living in poverty, or have a longer commute than 60 minutes. So this project will give them access to extending the Red Line will be a huge benefit in getting to work, getting to school, getting to other things going on in the city. It will make a dramatic change for a lot of folks who right now have very, very long travel times. Next slide, please. A little bit about the project history. This project has a long history. As I just mentioned, the terminal was finished in 1969. And this has kind of been circling around the CTA for quite a while. But in terms of more recent history, there was a 2004 referendum in 2 impacted wards. And CTA, based on that referendum, began an alternatives analysis in 2006. There were 5 alternatives that were advanced through conceptual engineering, going through a lot of public meetings and preliminary cost analysis. The selected alternative has now gone through environmental impact planning, preliminary design, and we've also been doing a lot of real estate identification and purchase in the last couple of years. In 2020, we also, as I referenced a little bit earlier, we initiated the Transit Supportive Development Plan, or TSD plan, in partnership with the City of Chicago and the Cook County Land Bank, excuse me. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the TSD plan. This was adopted by the Plan Commission, in May of 2023. It outlines the potential for different types of development in communities near the project area. So as you go through each station, there's kind of a section for each station. There was a lot of community engagement that went into this plan. It is available on the CTA website and the City of Chicago website. I would encourage those who are interested in transit supportive development and planning to check this out. There's a lot of information there, and I think it has the potential to really assist with how these neighborhoods change after the train comes. Next slide, please. So talking about equity, equity is a huge focus of the Red Line extension. As I kind of referenced, this project will increase access to jobs, to education, and just generally to economic development for area residents and for people across the South Side, and even into some of the other counties and even into Indiana to some extent. We're predicting at this point that there will be a 30-minute decrease in average commute time to the loop, which is huge. If you're used to having an hour and that drops your commute to 30 minutes, that's a lot of time you get back in your week to do other things. As I referenced, our stations will be fully accessible, and they will also have connections to CTA and PACE bus routes. So folks who are still connecting from other parts of the city will still have that access. Our analysis indicates that there will be a 47% increase in newly accessible jobs within an hour commute of the project area. Because the folks who live in the project area are more likely than other Chicagoans to lack access to that employment, this could really make a difference for people who are looking to have employment, whether that's in the loop or in other parts of the city. That connection will be there and they will be able to get that access. It will also, importantly, allow the rest of the city, other Chicagoans, to access destinations and community assets in the RLE project area. There's a lot of really exciting things that are happening in those neighborhoods, a lot of destinations that right now, if you wanted to access them, you'd either have to have a car or go to 95th Street and then perhaps get on one or two buses. So having direct access to those is going to make a big difference, not just for the residents of the project area, but for the entire city and the region. In terms of employment opportunities, our estimated construction job creation throughout Cook County is 25,000 jobs. So that could be a big impact even in itself. And we are having significant set-asides for disadvantaged business enterprise participation, both in construction and professional services throughout the project. So that's a huge commitment on the part of the CTA. We're working really closely with the DBE community, both on the construction side and on the professional services side. So that is definitely creating opportunities. Next slide, please. I already talked about the TSD plan a bit, but again, that has a lot more detail tonight than I could spend probably the entire time of this webinar talking about the neighborhood economic development plan that's referenced there. I will let those who are interested in it go check it out, but I will just say that the RLE is estimated that it's going to catalyze millions of dollars in real estate development around these new stations. And what this plan is intending to do is to make sure that that development happens in a way that makes sense for the community, that prioritizes the needs of those who live in those communities. And it was a lot of work for our team. So for those who are interested in that, I would definitely recommend that you check it out. And I think someone put the link in the chat. So thank you to whoever did that. Next slide, please. And that's it. And I will turn it over to talk about zero emissions.
Thanks, Claire. Hello, everyone. My name is Roberto Torres. As you heard, I'm the Chief Mechanical Officer for PACE, working on all zero emission projects here. Next slide, please. Today, I'm giving a short presentation on our fleet and facility planning efforts. For today's presentation, I will be giving a brief introduction to the Project Zero program, the projected changes to our fleet, future energy demands, the required facility modifications to our garages, and the funding needed to make this a reality. Next slide, please. PACE is the Suburban Bus Division of the RTA and is responsible for providing public transportation in the 6-county region of northeastern Illinois, including Cook, DuPage, Lake, McHenry, Kane, and Will counties. PACE covers a service area of approximately 3,700 square miles. Our fleet consists of over 700 fixed route buses and over 1,300 paratransit buses. Next slide, please. In 2021, PACE adopted Driving Innovations, which aligns with the agency's effort to operate a fully zero-emission fleet by 2040. The Zero-Emission Bus Transition Plan and the Zero-Emission Bus Facilities Plan highlight the crucial modification improvements and funding needed for PACE to reach its goals of a zero-emissions fleet by 2040. The Zero-Emission Bus and Facilities Transition Plan focuses on accommodating EVs. However, as technology advances on other zero-emission vehicles like hydrogen fuel cell buses, PACE is committed to evaluating and adjusting these plans to best meet the needs of our riders. During the development of the bus transition plan, we evaluated our current route structure and ability of BEVs to meet our operational requirements. Using this information, the team was able to calculate the projected battery electric fleet size, energy demand, and facility requirements for a fully battery electric bus fleet. And with this information, we developed the companion zero-emission bus facility transition plan that was finalized in February of this year. Next slide, please. To better understand the operational demands of an all-electric fleet, we utilize computer modeling software developed by our project management oversight firm called Peers. The model looks at the daily work assignment to a given vehicle known as a block. We know that a fully fueled diesel bus can complete all blocks in our schedule. However, battery electric buses can have shorter ranges, so we wanted to see how many of our vehicle blocks could be completed using BEVs, assuming the vehicle would only be charged at our divisions at the start and end of our days. The data identified what blocks could be completed with today's current battery technology and what blocks need to deploy this technology when the range of BEVs improves. Next slide. The tier model incorporates multiple inputs, including existing and future battery size, battery range, route length, schedule blocking, topography, seasonal temperatures, and driver variability, to name a few. The table shown on this slide displays how many of PACE's existing vehicle blocks could be completed using both present and future battery technology. Based on the model, PACE will be able to operate between 75 to 100% of the vehicles once we reach 800 kilowatt batteries. As a nod to how rapidly battery technology is advancing, the BEVs that PACE will be receiving this year come equipped with a 738 kilowatt battery, increasing the number of blocks we can operate today. With this information in hand, PACE was able to confidently target North Division and Waukegan to house our first fully battery electric fleet, given the ability of these buses to meet operational requirements. Next slide, please. BEVs require significant upgrades to electrical infrastructure and garage facilities. This slide shows the increase of electrical power supply needed to accommodate the charging of a fully battery electric fleet using charge management systems. Given the amount of projected power usage, PACE has been working very closely with our electrical provider, ComEd, to plan for and schedule upgrades to the electrical grid to support vehicle charging at our garages. This work is already underway for PACE's North Division, where ComEd has been instrumental in securing high voltage equipment to support vehicle charging and meeting regularly with PACE to coordinate delivery of increased power to the site as we begin install of charging infrastructure this year. Next slide, please. These electrical upgrades, along with structural modifications at PACE facilities, are detailed in the Project Zero facility plan. Next slide, please. To begin the facility planning effort, the team performed facility assessments to gather information on existing conditions at the various operating divisions. The assessment evaluated original design capacity of PACE's garages, the current, the current fleet quantities, as well as the planned fleet size and propulsion technology based on the fleet transition plan to identify needed improvements. Since PACE's inception 40 years ago, operations have grown significantly without major expansions to our garages. This has led more and more to the fleet being stored outside where it is impacted by inclement weather. As more battery electric buses enter the fleet, outdoor storage becomes problematic as it can have a negative impact on their performance. Given this and the existing need to increase indoor vehicle storage, the design to upgrade facility prioritizes interior storage and designated parking for BEVs so that they can be stored under overhead charging equipment. In addition to the upgrades to accommodate a growing zero emissions fleet, the proposed improvement to PACE's operating divisions address state of good repairs items while also expanding, modernizing administrative, driver, and maintenance areas. Next slide, please. As PACE's existing fleet ages and replacement vehicles are needed, we are strategically planning vehicle purchases in line with our facility modifications and expansions. To meet our goal of operating a zero emissions fleet by 2040, we will need to purchase an average of 35 ZEBs annually until 2040. However, we know these vehicles cannot begin to serve our riders until we have the necessary supporting infrastructure in place. Funding these improvements and ZEB purchase present challenges. Next slide. So where do we get the funding? Next slide. A traditional diesel or CNG bus costs between $400,000 to $600,000. The current estimated cost for a 40-foot ZEB is between $1.2 million and $1.5 million. Accounting for annual escalation, PACE will need to invest over $1 billion to replace our existing fleet with zero-emission buses between now and 2040. While traditional funding streams like federal formula can be used to purchase these vehicles, additional funding will be required to keep up with the vehicle replacement schedule. Next slide. In addition to the funding needed to procure zero-emission vehicles, substantial capital funding is also required to make state-of-good repair improvements while expanding and upgrading PACE facilities to accommodate zero-emission buses. We are also future-proofing to ensure that our facilities will be able to accommodate changes in the future. The designs considered everything from structural modification to accommodate the additional weight of charging equipment, oversized conduit to enable PACE to accommodate garages as more BEVs go into service on an annual basis. Based on the conceptual design and cost estimates developed under the Zero Emission Bus Facility Plan, an additional $1.2 billion in funding will be required to upgrade our garages. Now, while these price tags may seem daunting, investing in a more sustainable future is our goal, and PACE is ready to take on the challenge. I want to emphasize that having bus and facility transition plans developed puts PACE in a strong position to pursue funding for our projects. In the last 2 years, we have secured funding to install charging infrastructure throughout our service areas for PACE's first 22 BEVs being delivered this year. PACE has sufficient funding to convert our North Division of Waukegan to support a fully electric fleet by 2027. We are also leveraging existing Rebuild Illinois funding to expand and future-proof River Division and Elgin to support electric fixed route buses and paratransit buses. As part of this year's grant cycle, PACE is pursuing federal raised funding to upgrade Southwest Division and Bridgeview to accommodate an initial fleet of 20 BEVs. We are also very excited to have partnered with RTA, Metra, and CTA to pursue a joint application through the EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program to secure funding for zero-emission vehicles for all 3 service ports. PACE is requesting funding for battery electric buses for Southwest and North Divisions. With that, I want to thank you for the opportunity and I look forward to hearing any questions you may have.
Thank you, Roberto. I'll now hand it over to our final presenter, Dustin, to discuss how Metra develops grant proposals that promote accessibility.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I'll start off with a little bit of a prequel here, tying into what John and Christopher mentioned in their presentations. But today we're going to be talking about how Metra develops the grant proposals that help us make our system more accessible as part of the broader regional transportation system. Next slide, please. Mentioned earlier in this presentation by John and Christopher, we do have a strategic plan that RTA adopted last year. Transit is the answer. It sets a couple important guideposts for each of us in the 3 service boards and how we make our decisions. So there is a core requirement that each service board invests in projects that improve equity and projects that achieve accessibility. So focusing on the latter there. RTA also has the capital project evaluation metrics, and some of those metrics tie directly into accessibility. So we'll speak to that a little bit in this presentation. Next slide, please. Metra, about the same time, adopted our own strategic plan update back in February 2023. This set up 5 goals that were mostly modifications of our prior goals in our original strategic plan. Importantly here, we explicitly list a goal to make the system more accessible. And that's broadly speaking. It's not just about the transit stations that we stop at, but also the vehicles that we use, the ways that people interact with our website, the ways that they get their tickets to even access our system. So Metra's 5 strategic plan goals set the stage for what we call investment prioritization. It's our internal way of evaluating projects as they get requested by our various user departments. And a couple of these, 3 of these strategic plan goals go directly into our investment prioritization, which I'll speak to on the next slide. So inside Metra, we use these 6 criteria. This is kind of the first filter as we evaluate our projects that get submitted to our department annually. On Friday, we just wrapped up our call for capital projects internally. And over the next month, we will evaluate the approximately 250 capital project requests that were received against these 6 criteria. These criteria were established before RTA's evaluation metrics were stood up, but they're very much hand in hand. And we did modify our criteria to ensure we get the kind of projects in our portfolio that match the RTA's requirements and the broader goals of the regional transportation system. So here in the orange, you'll notice the mandate and accessibility metrics are called out. I'm sorry, criteria are called out here. Accessibility projects get essentially extra boosts in our scoring system, and that makes the project more likely to get funding as we evaluate all of our capital needs. In addition to that, we do consider how the projects impact the customer's needs and how we are addressing the state of good repair of our system. So next slide, please. Another key point of this is once we get our capital project requests, our internal organizational structure really lends itself to having a direct connection with the project managers, the departments that are actually carrying out and implementing these projects. So I've put a truncated organizational chart here that really focuses on our external affairs department. We have a multitude of other departments as well, of course. And you'll see here in orange, our program development and grant pursuits division sits very close on the org chart to our stations and parking team. In fact, they're just down the hallway. So we know these projects, we monitor the project portfolio of accessibility projects in our realm. So we give a really nice connection between our project managers and ultimately when we go out to seek discretionary funding. Next slide, please. We consistently prepare for the grant opportunities that are afforded to us by first Rebuild Illinois, that was passed in 2019, and what is called IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Those two pieces of legislation at the state and federal level are really key in allowing us to go out and seek these accessibility improvement projects. Without those, we would not be in a good spot. So the timing has been right. The state passed Rebuild Illinois in 2019. It set up a few very important new funding sources. We first off got a bond issuance that was distributed to each of the service boards and many other state agencies. We also created a new PAYGO funding source. That's Pay As You Go is the acronym. And that sets us up with $75 million each year raised from gas tax revenues to spend on Metra's transit projects. CTA and PACE also get PAYGO funding as well. And then within that bill, there were some other bonds and other funds. So most notably, there was a $12 million earmark effectively for the 59th 60th Street station right next to the University of Chicago and the future Obama Presidential Center. So that $12 million is very key to having a local match in hand, as are the PAYGO funds and the bond funds that I just mentioned. In addition to that, the Rebuild Illinois legislation created several new programs, some clean energy programs, but with a focus on accessibility. And my presentation, it's important to note the state almost doubled the ITEP program, and that's very key to promoting pedestrian and bicycle improvements across the state. And again, we got a $2 million for 59th 60th Street station. Next slide, please. So the Rebuild Illinois legislation allowed us to prepare for the incoming series of new programs and new funding made available by the federal government. Without the state funding, we would be in a position where we couldn't put forward the required local match to many of these federal grant programs. And the federal grant programs were propped up by the new bipartisan infrastructure law, also referred to as IIJA. It made some initial investments in our formula funds. Right off the top, Metra got a 30% boost in our annual capital funding that comes from the federal government. And then it created a slew of new programs, including RAISE that Roberto mentioned earlier, and a program called ASAP. The All Stations Accessible program is a really key funding source to make transit stations accessible for all riders. And again, these programs all require local match. Typically 20% of the total project cost needs to be covered with local funds coming from the RTA, from the service board revenue, from fares, or from these new sources like PAYGO and the state bond program. Next slide, please. So accessibility is not just limited to our stations, and it's really critical to keep in mind the full path from somebody's home to the destination they ultimately want to arrive at needs to be accessible through ticketing, through getting into the station and onto the boarding platform, and then onto our trains ultimately. And many riders will know that we have a pretty aggressive set of stairs on 10 of our 11 lines to get into the trains. We're happy to say that with the new zero emission train sets program that we're setting up, that will have a near level boarding system, or it might require about 2 steps to get into the cabin. We'll also have ADA lifts on each of those passenger cars. Something we offer on all of our trains at this point in time, but not necessarily every car in that train consists. So we will get new bi-level cars with the help of a federal rail vehicle replacement grant. And again, these new rail cars are expected to have an easier boarding process with a little bit with fewer stairs and with new vehicle lifts that are consistently available and operable on our trains. And then we also have some smaller projects that in our portfolio will look at accessing the station from the curb cuts to the crosswalks and how you actually get onto the boarding platform. So we take a wide range view of all the applications that we submit and all the discretionary grant funds that we pursue. And in one case, we've secured $1.2 million from the Community Project Fund account that was secured in part with Rep. Quigley. And that will improve the access points to our Edgebrook station. So projects large and small need to be considered. Next slide, please. So the mechanics of actually submitting a discretionary grant require all the things I just mentioned. It's keeping your eye on the target that RTA has set for us. It's putting the new funding sources to work, and then we also have a monthly discretionary grant opportunity review session with various departments in our agencies. We're consistently looking at the options and opportunities that are out there. Thankfully, the USDOT has a very nice website that organizes their opportunities, but there are many other agencies that we seek grants from. So we're monitoring these opportunities monthly. When we do submit a discretionary grant, we look at how our performance has gone. We get a debrief with our potential grantors. And in that debrief session, they always talk about the core goals of each of their funding programs, where our applications had a positive light and areas where we could have done a better job in explaining the value of these projects. Next slide, please. A critical part of our application process and pursuing discretionary grants is to really focus on how this impacts people. And it's not just a station, it's not just a rendering, it is how somebody gets to work or to their grandma's house, to the hospital, or a doctor's office rather. So we need to tell a compelling story of how this project will impact our communities in Northeast Illinois and how it will improve the regional transportation system. With that, every other applicant to these discretionary grant opportunities have their own various needs as well. So for example, the USDOT's RAISE program had over 1,100 applicants in their latest round, requesting a total of $15 billion. At the end of the day, the DOT had only $2 billion to hand out and was only able to select 162 projects. So while we might have a compelling project that really pushes our agencies forward or helps make a station accessible, there's a lot of competition for these dollars. And again, we always frame accessibility as an expanded concept from door to door and think about how our riders use our system. Next slide, please. So with that, thank you, Mary, for the setup and organizing this panel, and thanks.
Thank you, Dustin. That concludes the presentation portion of today's webinar. So I'd like to open the floor for questions. As a reminder, you can type your question in the chat box or use the raise hand feature. If you are not seeing the raised hand feature, what you may need to do is, select more from the menu bar and then reactions, and you'll see the raise hand option. Well, let's see.
There was a question from earlier in the chat that I can read aloud. The question was, decarbonization is also a topic for the rolling stock. What are RTA's plans in terms of decarbonizing rail as well? Dustin, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the battery electric train sets you all are procuring.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were fortunate to land a very large, our agency's largest discretionary grant to date from the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program. It's a federal program that gives money to each state to dole out towards projects that meet the core goals. In our region, CMAP actually handles that grant. So we had this great concept for future vehicle procurements for our locomotives, or even different rolling stock options than we've ever had. It was a multi-year process to plan and prepare for that, but we were able to secure a contract in February with Stadler, who will build our first zero emission vehicles. And we're going to go with a smaller train set, single story. We'll have at least 8 of those in our initial order, and they will operate in the Rock Island line, specifically navigating to the Beverly branch. We expect that battery power technology to be useful to run those trains in the midday periods and on the weekends on the Rock Island line. But we are also pursuing other avenues. We'll be seeking out battery electric locomotives to put onto the front of our traditional bi-level rolling stock as well. And a reminder, we always have our Metra electric line, which is fully electrified. It's been around for more than a century, operating with 0 tailpipe emissions.
Thanks, Dustin. Looks like we've got a few questions in the chat box here. Try and get these in the order that they came in. I've got a question from Curtis. So it says, what venues are available for coordinating the implementation of transportation CIPs in economic development, investments, and incentives? For example, I could envision a productive collaboration between RTA, Metra, Cook County, Harvey, and others around the Harvey Intermodal Transit Center. RTA/Metra with the station area improvements, and Cook County, Harvey supporting the acquisition and demolition of blighted property, implementing complete streets on Broadway, 154th, etc. So I'm going to open that up to any of our panelists here.
I'll jump in to start by saying Metra and PACE coordinated on a RAISE grant application in 2022 to find $20 million for the new Harvey Intermodal Transit Center. As part of that project, we will stretch a couple blocks to the west and kind of restructure the streets around the PACE bus drop-off. I believe there will be one street closure that the city of Harvey has decided they want to move forward with. So there'll be some new public plazas, a little bit easier to access transit. And I think spurring from that, the city of Harvey has taken the lead on figuring out how to address the blighted properties near that area and their downtown core. They have a new residential building coming up just 2 blocks away from our transit station. And the city of Harvey's really taken the lead on there. I think Cook County has been a participant the whole way through. And I also believe the Cook County Invest in Cook program has provided some funding for Harvey to move forward with their ambitions to address some blighted properties in the area.
Thank you, Dustin. We've got a question here from Leah. Is there information available on how much city, state, and federal money is spent on roads, highway in comparison to public transit infrastructure?
Is anyone from government affairs on? They might know.
We can always circle back to that one.
I believe there have been some not-for-profit groups, transportation specifically, I think is finding about 80-20 split, a little more favorable than it has been historically, but still about 80% of the IIJA funds, the bipartisan infrastructure, while going towards highway projects and 20% going towards transit, specifically for the surface transportation grant programs.
We've got a question here from Sarah about electrification. It says, are PACE and CTA considering trolley buses as part of electrification directions?
I could say for PACE, we haven't talked about it. We have some trolleys that operate out of Glen Ellen and Schaumburg, but there hasn't been any talk because we're focusing on our fixed routes at the moment.
Why would that not be fixed route? Like why would that not be harmonious with fixed route?
Well, what I'm getting at is those facilities are not run by PACE. They're contracted, and we're focusing on PACE divisions currently. Because we have to figure out who's going to take ownership of the charging equipment, how is it going to be placed, because a lot of those properties we do not own. So that's the biggest discussion we're having is who's going to take responsibility for the charging equipment and who's paying for it.
Thanks, Roberto. Let's see. Lots of questions coming in now. Here is one. So from John from Metra, expanding on why battery electric vehicles are being pursued as opposed to electrifying lines similar to the Metra electric lines.
Yeah, great question. Back in, I believe 2016, the RTA helped fund a study, joint study with RTA and Metra in the various options for decarbonizing our transit system. It included CNG, it included electrification overhead, and we were specifically looking in another study at the Rock Island line. Effectively, that all comes down to the huge funding gap and to be able to do that. We don't have a recent, post-COVID price estimate or financial analysis for electrifying any of our lines per se, but generally the complications are putting up overhead catenary and the required power supply in one of the densest regions in the country. It's a very large undertaking and a very expensive challenge. We've seen a few other transit agencies look at that. Caltrain is moving forward, but they have a much different operating profile. In the Chicago area, one huge consideration we have is our interoperability with freight rail, and especially those double stacked freight container trains. So at this time, it's a very big uphill battle to try and construct overhead catenary. And so we are testing another avenue with the battery electric train sets and battery electric locomotives. There's also more of an ability to fund those pilot projects with the new federal grant opportunities versus a less successful application, most likely for overhead catenary expansion.
Thanks, Dustin. Claire, a question for you. If you would expand on the ASAP progress related to the blue line and to kind of circle back to the red line extension project, you mentioned during your presentation that will include 4 new fully accessible stations. If you would just elaborate a bit on what fully accessible means.
Sure. So fully accessible for the CTA means essentially aligning with both the City of Chicago building codes or whatever municipality we're building in, as well as the Americans for Disabilities Act. And what we're looking at is within the station boundaries to make sure that there's a fully accessible path of travel. So if there is an elevator, or if there's 2 levels to the station, there's going to be an elevator and there'll be accessible signage. It's all kind of aligned with those 2 laws, City of Chicago or whatever municipality building code, and then with the Americans for Disabilities Act. I do not work on the All Stations Accessibility Program at this time, but I do know that the team is working on an update to our plan, which is really exciting, and I believe that's coming out later this summer. So I think there will be much more information about the progress. I know they have at least 2 of the stations under construction right now, which is really exciting. And I think there are a few that are finishing design soon. But for those who are interested, later this summer, I believe that the update to the All Stations Accessibility Plan for CTA will be coming out, and that will have more information on timeline and prioritization.
Thanks, Claire. Roberto, a question for you. You mentioned that PACE is committed to a 100% zero emission fleet by 2040. PACE is also one of 230 transit agencies that committed to the FTA's Sustainable Transit for a Healthy Planet Challenge. will you share with us how that Healthy Planet Challenge aligns with PACE's zero emission bus plan that you discussed?
We honestly, I was talking to people within the agency about this question, and we honestly believe that getting rid of diesels is going to lower our carbon footprint and bring to a healthier environment for everyone that we serve. It's one of the biggest topics we deal with right now is bus idling and the fumes it's emitting. And it's one of the things that we are really focused on eliminating through zero emission vehicles. So that's where we stand on that.
Thank you. This question is from Marcel, and open to any of our panelists here to respond. So have you had an opportunity in your work to ask disabled people who are sensitive to sound or are vision or hearing impaired how noise and audio artifacts from reverberation and echoes resulting from acoustics and infrastructure affect their access and experience?
I'll jump in by saying I have not directly. We have our stations and parking division that interfaces with an ADA advisory committee that we have. Likewise, our IT technology deployment group also works with our ADA committee advisory. We have a lot of stakeholders there. They meet quarterly, and we do occasionally do some tours. I think next up they'll tour a mock-up of our new bi-level cars at one of our rail stations this summer. So the ADA community has a direct contact at Metra and a committee, and sometimes work with the project managers. As far as us in our department, not so much.
So similar, again, I don't work on the All Stations Accessibility Plan, but I know that there is a advisory council that helped develop the original plan and then the update to that plan, and their kind of guidance on how station experience works for them was a really important facet to that plan.
Thank you both. And it looks like Erin put a link into the ASAP webpage as well that will have more information. We've got a question here from Matt regarding bus electrification. Has PACE or CTA explored overhead wire trackless trolley buses? I understand that requires extensive coordination with DOTs. There are examples of them working well in Vancouver, San Francisco, Boston, and more.
Again, no, we have not. And I think for us, the area we cover, it's something that doesn't seem feasible to us being in the suburbs. So it's something we haven't explored at all or talked about.
I am not sure exactly what options have been or are being considered at CTA. That's some other multiple departments are involved in those conversations.
Clare, a question for you regarding public engagement. So we know public engagement is a crucial part of the Red Line extension. How is CTA working with community members and organizations to inform this project?
Yes, so community engagement has been a huge part of the Red Line extension since kind of its inception. I'll kind of talk to what the team is doing now and then get into a little bit of how we got to where we are. So right now we have a project advisory council that meets on, I believe, a monthly basis. So those are residents of the communities who are advising the leadership of the project directly on their experience and how things are going, what their priorities are. There was also a lot of public engagement that went into the selection of the locally preferred alternative. So where exactly the main line and the stations will be. And there were multiple, I think 5 different potential pathways that were discussed, and over, I think, multiple years of engagement with different communities, the locally preferred alternative, the 4 stations that we're planning to do, that's how those were selected. Our government relations team and our communications team also work very closely with the aldermen for the wards in which these stations will be located. They're doing a lot of direct outreach with them, as well as their different community groups, and a lot of work on workforce development, since that's a really important issue to these communities. So It's been a big priority for the project and will continue to be going forward.
Thanks, Claire. Roberto, a question for you. So ComEd is the region's electric utility provider. How are PACE and ComEd working together to ensure that PACE's facilities are supplied with the necessary electricity from the power grid to support a ZEB fleet?
Once we decided in the direction we were going with battery electric buses, we coordinated with ComEd and we have monthly meetings. We petitioned them to give us one point of contact for all our facilities. And he's the go-to point of contact for all our projects. And he puts us in touch with all the engineering departments we need to work with. So for us, it's been a really good experience, especially since we're meeting with them on a monthly basis and we're getting updates to the projects, to things we have on order. Everything gets talked about in these meetings.
Great, thank you. Checking the chat here to see if we've got any new questions. It doesn't look like we have any raised hands at the moment. Well, Dustin, I've got a question for you while we see if anyone has some final thoughts here. So we know that, as Roberto mentioned earlier, our region took a collaborative step in applying for US EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. How has Metra worked with other regional partners or municipalities to successfully apply for funding?
Yeah, good question. We have worked with a couple other agencies as well as some universities. We had a collaboration with PACE to secure the $20 million from US DOT's raise for the Harvey Transportation Center. And in that case, we had a kind of collaborative SharePoint website, regular meetings 2 to 3 times a week to draft the full application package together. And we did a similar thing with the RTA submission of that climate pollution reduction grant as well. 3 service boards plus RTA staff really leaning in to help make sure that submission went in April. We've worked with Cook County to secure some funding from last year's or the previous round of the All Stations Accessible program. And after a couple applications in partnership with Cook County, we ultimately secured $29 million for the 95th Street CSU station. We'll add 2 elevators there, make that fully accessible, better connect with all the redevelopment happening along the 95th Street corridor and Chicago State University. And then we've worked with UIC, UIUC as well, and some kind of research and experimental demonstration grant programs. We're open to plenty of other opportunities. We have a couple great funding partners that consistently, put some money towards our projects. And more recently, we're seeking some very large discretionary grants in partnership with IDOT and Amtrak to change kind of the intercity rail operations coming in and out of Chicago, and Metra's service as well. So we'll speak more to that in the months to come, and hopefully we have some wins to come out of those discussions. But yeah, we kind of take an all hands on deck approach, and any interested agency or partner, we want to move forward with great partnerships that make a better project and a more competitive discretionary grant application.
Thank you, Dustin. I don't see any new questions in the chat here. Oh, looks like we've got one that just came in. So Roberto, this is for you. Will PACE purchase battery buses that are sized for the average passenger load? Many current routes with 40-foot buses never see more than 10 riders at a time.
Yeah, currently we're in the process of looking at 40-foot and 35-foot buses. So there will be, it's not all going to be one 40-foot bus. It'll be dependent on what buses are being replaced at our divisions, and that is something we are looking at.
Great, thank you for sharing. Well, it looks like that covers our questions for today. I want to thank you all for joining us, and a big thank you to John, Chris, Claire, Roberto, and Dustin for taking the time to share your work with us. As a reminder, this session was the first of the RTA's 4-part Transportation Tuesday webinar series. Oh, if you're interested in registering for the future sessions, I will put a link in the chat box. And with that, thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and take care. If there is a question we didn't get to, please stick around, and I'm happy to take your email address and see if we can connect you with a staff member to answer your question.